Welcome back, everybody, to the next episode of Continuous Delivery Office Hours, where this week we will look at a few events that Bob and Steve have been at over the last week or two, and we will dive into a few of the topics that came up during some of those presentations, talks at the recent events, and things like that. So I pass over to Bob. I think you're the most recent back from KubeCon.
Yeah. I came back from KubeCon. Before that, I was at GitHub Universe. So, if you're watching this after whenever, um, I've been on the road quite a bit. Did a number of different events. So, both events really, I thought they're really good. If you've never been to a GitHub Universe, it's very unique in the sense the number of leaders versus individual contributors is much higher. Like that ratio is much higher than if you go to, like, say, a KubeCon, which I thought is really fascinating when you get a chance to have these types of conversations with everyone. The thing that seems to be resonating with everyone again is our platform hub, and as well as templating, blueprints, guardrails, everything along those lines. That really resonated well. I thought that was really cool, getting a chance to talk to a number of different people. Uh, what was fascinating to me is when we got to KubeCon was really that day zero event that they have before KubeCon. So day zero, if you're not familiar with KubeCon, is they always have, say, Platform Engineering Day, or they have ArgoCon, or they have Open Feature Summit. They have all of these sub conferences that occur before the actual KubeCon on the day before. Like in this case, it was Monday. Some days it's Tuesday, and KubeCon is typically 3 days after that. So for Platform Engineering Day, we sponsored Platform Engineering Day, and it was really interesting because the number of people that we talked to at Platform Engineering Day, it seemed like they were on like version 2 or version 3 of their platform that they've been trying to put together. So they've kind of, it's like, oh, we've tried this and we ran into this issue, we ran into this issue, we ran into this issue. It's like, okay, now we need to kind of pull this back and rebuild it a bit because it's just not working out for what we have. And so it's really interesting to get a chance to talk to a number of people about that.
Hmm. And I'm sure and within those various versions, they have multiple different categories of things that they're trying to solve for. Where does, in terms of like deployments, continuous delivery, where does that bubble up in terms of like this is the main thing, or is it like
Yeah.
second or third? Yeah.
Yeah. And so typically they are looking to solve it for deployments, and they really like the Platform Engineering Day. It's coincides with KubeCon, so take this with a grain of salt. But the conversations I had was typically around they are standardizing on Argo or some sort of GitOps solution, but most likely than not, it's going to be Argo. And they're really pushing forward with this GitOps style solution. So really, they're starting to run into these problems because, again, as powerful as Argo is it doesn't have concepts such as environments, it doesn't have concepts such as releases, it doesn't have concepts such as all of these pre and post deploy steps that I need to run, such as how do I integrate with ServiceNow, how do I perform some day two style operations, how do I deploy my database, a number of these different things that you have to do that are kind of imperative to get to the point where you can get declarative with GitOps, which is I just need to make an update to this manifest file or to my Helm chart or whatever the case may be. And so uh, that's the area that I think where people are starting to see some of the challenges that people are running into with this kind of platform adoption of Argo CD is that how do we do this at scale? The first couple worked out really well. The first couple of teams, they're seeing a lot of success, and it's great. But there are a couple of caveats always with those first couple of teams. The first one is that those first couple of teams, they're typically a little bit more forward thinking. They're typically more on the cutting edge. They might be doing greenfield style applications, and so they can get away with a number of shortcuts that when you start rolling it out at scale to hundreds or thousands of teams, that you're probably just not going to be able to do. And so again, that's I think where people are starting to see some of these challenges at scale.
And I think that's the classic problem of how many Argos do you have? Because if you
Yeah.
have one, it is actually superbly simple and you just don't have any problems. But as soon as you have an answer that's greater than one, you start bumping into those things where, like, actually it gets a bit more tricky to do it well.
Yeah, you say that with one. We talked to one person. They say, well, we have one Argo instance, but we have 30,000 applications in that Argo instance. So I
It's
think
like
it's
one
one.
giant instance.
Depends how
Yeah,
you cut
one
it.
giant
Yeah.
instance. Yeah. So yeah, it's still that one. But I think there's a certain threshold. I don't know what it's going to be, but generally it's typically more than three Argo CD instances, or they cross some sort of Rubicon on the number of applications where they start bumping into some of these challenges as well. So yeah, that was one I was like, huh, I wasn't expecting that number to come out of your mouth when you said you had one Argo CD instance. But what they're doing is they're doing a classic hub and spoke model where it's one Argo CD instance that's talking to a number of different Kubernetes clusters.
Yes, that's interesting because a lot of people are backing away from the hub and spoke model because they
Yep,
don't like the security posture on it.
yep,
Because you're effectively giving people this one room. If you can get into this one room, all the vaults come off of that one room, and you just have access to everything. So yeah, I think it feels nice it simplifies where you need to go to look,
yes.
but it does increase the risk a little.
Yeah, no, uh, I think that's one of the interesting things about Argo is that there's all these different ways that you can set it up, and there are definitely good practices and there are definitely bad practices, and there definitely are you okay with this practice if you're willing to make these types of trade-offs. I'm by no means the end all be all Argo expert, so I couldn't tell you yes that's wrong or yes that's right. It's more of does it work for you and does it satisfy your company policies and requirements is really my first question.
Which is the point at which you find out people don't know what their organizational policy and requirements are. So it's kind
Yeah.
of back to the drawing board, folks.
Yeah, we typically will see that.
How about you, Steve? You've been on your travels as well over the last few weeks.
I haven't been quite as far. I only went to London DevOps, but there was a really great group of people. So I chatted through all of the research we've been doing. We were looking at the platform engineering research in a kind of family fortunes style to see if they could guess the right answers. Now, actually, the room were very tapped into what's going on in platform engineering and didn't fall for any of the traps I set at all. So I had to congratulate them. I'm like, either you're all doing this and experiencing these problems, or you're the most cynical room I've ever been in. It's one of those two things. But the answers were all correct. So they kind of guessed that platforms were mandatory, and they guessed that the people sponsoring platforms didn't care so much about DevX and reducing cognitive load. It was more about standardization and things like that. So we ended up having a really deep discussion, which continued after the talk and it continued after the whole event in a pub around the corner um, about this idea. And this is something I'm pushing quite hard on, but there's quite a lot of resistance for it. Of instead of making your platform mandatory, you need to make your policies mandatory. So if
Mm,
every pipeline should include security scanning and artifact attestation or whatever it is, that's what should be mandatory. And if the team solves it without the platform, you're happy, you've got what you wanted, right? They're doing those things that you wanted. But most of the time, that's going to make them want to use the platform. They'll be like, well, it's like, yeah, we can do CI/CD, but then there's all these other things that we don't really want to do. But if we use the platform, we'll get those for free. So you're kind of creating a bit of demand for the platform. I feel at the moment there's a big disconnect where teams that are on the platform have got all of this compliance and security stuff, all of these requirements, and they're hitting them because they're on the platform. And if you're a team that's not on the platform, you kind of get away with it. You just don't do them. And because you're not on the platform, they seem to not notice that you're just FTPing, right? YOLO.
And
it's
is that
interesting. Go go ahead, Tony.
I was just is, is
Yeah.
that the main theme for resistance? Is that why they don't want to cross that barrier and have the sort of policies in play that they can't get away with it then?
I think it's almost a reason not to adopt the platform if it means that you then don't have to be subject to
Mm.
policy. It's
Mm,
almost like, oh, we can shortcut by just not bothering, right?
yeah.
Fly under the radar. So they're creating this situation where it's actually easier to not adopt the platform because then you just don't have to meet those requirements. And I think that's like it's almost the classic shooting yourself in the foot of an organization where they're doing something which is acting against their own best interests. It's like doing the opposite of what they intend. So yeah, just if they made the policies mandatory for everyone and they explain why these things are needed, why it's important, and that there's an easy answer to it. Like me as a developer, I'm going to sit there thinking, how much of my time do I want to spend on that versus solving the problem that I was speaking to that user about? Right. And
Yeah.
most of the time, I'm going to want to optimize for solving user problems.
Yeah, it's I agree with making policies mandatory, and I but the reason I came to that conclusion is vastly different than the reason you came to your conclusion. Uh, it was when we are talking about Platform Hub within Octopus Deploy, because we're going to have templates, we're going to have policies, we're eventually going to have reports and everything like that. And we were talking about what about all of the existing customers that are currently using Octopus Deploy that have built out these workflows, that have built out these deployment processes. And let's say hypothetically they had 2,000 projects within Octopus Deploy, which means they have 2,000 deployment processes. Now, chances are they're not actively deploying all 2,000 of them on any given week or even month. So let's say hypothetically we're talking 600, 700 active projects being deployed. And then you start talking about process templates as well and or project templates. Okay, now you're talking about taking something that's working that we know is working because it's being deployed continuously over and over again and forcing someone to suddenly adopt process templates. Hey, now you have to rip out these steps and replace it with these steps. Will it work? Should, hopefully. But typically, as long as if you're going to be the first through the door, chances are you're not going to. That's not going to be the one that works. So we're talking about that. We're trying to be pragmatic about existing customer adoption and what do we expect. And really, it comes back to policies. Policies being very powerful, but also being something completely new to Octopus because it sits outside of the deployment process. What we're doing is we're basically just running a hook, for lack of a better term, when you do a deployment or when you do a runbook run. And then we're looking at adding additional hooks, such as when you click on save of a deployment process, you could test against a policy to see if you're still in compliance. There are a number of different ways that you can do that. So policies was a really low effort way for people to start guaranteeing compliance because oftentimes there are always going to be, I have this step template that everyone should be using and it should be the first thing that runs, or everyone should be sending Slack notifications and not email notifications or something along those lines. And so you can go through and you can check all of that and make sure that it's actually working and you can add it in there. Even better, you can add the policy and you can warn people. And I think maybe to your point, Steve, is that policies requirements are good in enforcing policies, but I think you need to get people on board first, which is first warn them, give them a chance to reconcile. Don't just start blocking them from being able to deploy from day one. And so that's really kind of what we did. It was like, okay, now we're starting to warn people, hey, we're going to give you 90 days to reconcile this or to solve this, and so you don't see this warning anymore. And then after 90 days, like, listen, I told you what was going to happen. I gave you an appropriate amount of time. Now I'm going to enforce this policy, and now you can't deploy, and now you have to make this change. Like this wasn't you had to make this change no matter what. I gave you the opportunity to prioritize that and not make it an emergency, but now you've made this an emergency. So because of your lack of proper planning, um, and that felt like it was a better way than just kind of ham-fisted, like no, you have to adopt these process templates and everything like that. So, but for but it was also interesting because we're also talking about either existing customers that are adopting a brand new technology, such as Argo CD, or they're adopting Octopus Deploy for the first time. Then it makes a lot more sense to have templating also be part of that process because you're going to be building out the deployment process as you're going. And so it's much easier. So you just kind of have this natural iterative approach. And then you can also add in the policies at the same time. So everyone else that comes afterwards, they have everything to your point of already being there, ready to go for free, those types of things.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. I think that grace period, like we've all done some kind of program of work where we said the compiler's got all of these warnings. Let's actually start elevating them so that we can resolve them because some of these could be causing a problem or may cause a problem in the future. And if you just switch it on and that's it, that literally everything stops.
Yeah.
So having that grace period where you can kind of switch it on, they become more visible, and then you can go through and like you look at your little window and it's like 30,000 warnings, and then you kind of like make a few changes and it comes down to like 15,000 and then 5,000. Then it goes back up again because you did something, and it's like eventually you get it to zero, and then you're like, great, now we can actually make this fail a build if there's one of these warnings, they're now going to actually fail the build. We're going to have better quality software.
I mean, this has been a standard thing. What we're talking about with these this grace period, this warning, this is not a new concept, like you said. I did something similar with when we automated database deployments. The first thing that we did is we had to reconcile all of the different environments because every single environment was vastly different from one another. Our test environment had all of these temporary views or these views specifically for QA that they're the only ones that would go in and they would just take a look at this data. And so like, okay, how do we reconcile this? How do we handle all this? So his first one was kind of like, what if is essentially what it is. What if is going to happen if I turn this policy on, or if I turn this thing on, and giving people the chance to go, okay, I see what's going to happen. I'm going to fix this, and I'm going to but then then I'm going to make it work, and then you're going to get to the point where everything is working, and now okay, now we can turn it on and going forward. It's kind of back to I hate to say it, but code coverage with unit tests. When you start out, your code coverage is going to be 0%, and so anytime you add unit tests, like okay, we've got up to 20% code coverage. You almost want to add a policy in place that says, okay, a minimum of 20% code coverage going forward, and I want that to automatically always be incrementing. But eventually, you're going to get to a point where the margin of diminishing returns. Like you're never going to get 100% code coverage, but you always want to maintain a certain level of quality, so to speak.
Yes, unless of course you've been running TDD from the start, in which case code coverage kind of becomes moot, except for telling
Yeah,
you that there's a piece of code that can no longer be reached.
yeah, yeah. But one of the things that also came up at these conferences was around and naturally around AI, AI everywhere. I don't know about the conference that you attended, but it was a lot of AI discussions. One thing that really worked for a story that really worked for us, and something that I thought was really interesting, was around self-service remediation. What I mean by that is, so we have our AI assistant, we have our MCP server, we're working on the recovery agent within Octopus Deploy, all kind of focused on the same thing, which is how can we enable developers to remediate any sort of deployment failures via self-service. So tell them why this step failed, not just show them the log, but actually interpret the log and provide them, hey, this is why the step failed. It failed because of this. And then walk through like, here's a series of recommendations to reconcile this or to fix this and help you get going. And then if that reconciliation step doesn't work, that remediation step doesn't work, excuse me, then that's time to escalate it up to platform engineers. Because a lot of times, especially if you're looking at, say, templates, for example, the developer themselves, they don't have control over that template. They only have control over the inputs that go into that template. So there's either something wrong with the inputs or there's something wrong with the template as to why it caused it to fail. Or it could be some sort of transient error, which it was, the connection in the network just got borked and it just caused a restart. That happens. But again, providing that self-service remediation is like, yes, this was caused because there was a network issue. Go ahead and retry it. I retried it. It worked. Happy days. I didn't have to bug anyone about that. But if it was caused by a template bug, then you definitely need to escalate that up to the platform engineers. But you shouldn't be escalating every error up to the platform engineers. And I think that's one of the things that when I talk to some platform engineers at Platform Engineer Day, like, yes, that happens a lot more than we think because we've become effectively a ticketing system because we
Hmm.
have all these templates and we're the ones supplying it to the developers. And if something goes wrong, immediately they just turn around and say, this isn't working, fix it.
Yeah, and I think that failure resolution zone is a really great place to get that kind of assistance because that's effectively you would be going and searching this stuff up online and trawling through to find answers.
Yes.
So it can shortcut that process. So I see that being a real valuable piece of the puzzle. I think you probably don't want AI doing too much of your deterministic work.
Yes.
You don't want it doing the deployment itself. You want to have something which It's going to be exactly the same every time. You don't want it to just sometimes be different. So, but in those areas in between, there's opportunities for those non-deterministic things to be
Hmm.
accelerated.
Yeah, and I think that was, I attended a roundtable around AI, and it was more focused in on how can we adopt AI tooling internally rather than how do we add AI to the product itself. Um, and really what it boiled down to being was is what are the deterministic workflows that absolutely you have to have be consistent every single time? Auditing, compliance, your deployments, your builds. You don't want to guess as to, well, it worked, and then you rerun it. Oh, it failed this time. Well, why did it fail? I don't know because AI made this decision. You don't want to have something like that. But when it's something that's non-deterministic, like why did this failure occur? If it provided you a list of recommendations and if it's the exact same error and the recommendations were slightly different each time, well, that's just something that you had to try. It wasn't like this is going to be something that's actually going to work. It's just a list of recommendations. Same thing. I think I saw, uh, if I recall, we had some folks that were talking about using it for prospecting, for example, when they start talking to different customers, they'll use AI to generate summaries of the company and go out to all of these different sources and start pulling in all of this data. Now, is the data going to be 100% accurate? Most likely not, because it's not deterministic. It might make some pretty interesting leaps in logic. So you'll have to be very intuitive and kind of have to know some of those things. But what kind of freaked me out is I heard a few folks saying, "Oh yeah, we've adopted AI and it's increased our productivity by 10x," or I think one person claimed it increased it by 40x by having AI help you write code. And I was like, I'm very suspicious of that claim, to say the least.
Yeah, it's usually what you find is they have a very strange definition of productivity. I mean, we don't
Yeah.
have there's no universal definition for that word anyway. So that either that or they really are generating code 40 times faster. But now what they have is a queue of 1,000 pull requests waiting to be reviewed. So they've super optimized this tiny piece, and then it just gets
Yeah.
absorbed as soon as it goes into the next stage in the process, you know. Hey, we haven't mentioned the goal yet
I was
today.
gonna
This is
say,
probably the moment.
yeah, that's what I was gonna say. That's what the goal was gonna. I was just about to say that. As the goal said, any optimizations made before a bottleneck are an illusion. It doesn't matter if if my bottleneck can only process 100 widgets a day, whatever that was widgets may be. If I improve it and I can suddenly send 1,000 widgets to the bottleneck, it won't matter. All I can do is process 100 widgets a day. You have to
Yeah.
focus on optimizing the bottleneck, not optimizing all the steps before it.
There's going back a little bit to the end of the last conversation. I have a real bugbear being a marketer with how people are positioning and the messaging they put around us, where it's super broad. It's like AI powered DevOps, or generate using AI to generate your pipe, and you're just like, what does that mean?
Yeah.
What are you trying to say? You do where how you have articulated that specific use case, Bob, in our case is like, oh yeah, that seems really useful. That could be useful too. Whereas some of the others is just so broad, and some like you but coming back from events, I'm sure you walked past multiple bits and it was just AI something something
Oh yeah.
something, AI something something, and it's just so everyone has to latch onto it, but it just turns into like a sea of sameness, and who knows what it means.
Yeah, it was. So we look at our own telemetry, and when we look at our own telemetry, we can see anywhere from 17 times more deployments all the way up to, 34 times. I think I saw 56 times in some case. I do that many more deployments than I do modifications to my deployment process or even to my variables. As being very, very liberal as to what a modification is. But if all you're doing is modifying a variable, is that really a modification? Anyway, neither here nor there. But it's the question is how often are you generating those pipelines? Is like, does it make sense to optimize that? Because let's be honest, like if you talk to a customer, once they've fully adopted Octopus as an example. I'll go back to those 2000 projects I was talking about earlier when we were talking about how do we envision people adopting Platform Hub? It's once those 2000 projects are in place and they're stable and they're working, the chance of you going in and making wholesale changes pretty small. Yes, that can absolutely happen. You could have a big project come through. You could say, "Hey, instead of deploying via customize, we've made as a company, we made the decision that now we're going to transition everything over to Helm." Great, you know, ball out, go have fun with that. But that's a pretty big change. That's a project level. We need to fund this. That's going to take a quarter or two or three to get everyone on board, get everything migrated over. Can AI help in certain situations in that? Yeah, probably. There's probably certain optimizations AI can definitely help you out with. But I think it comes back to being very pragmatic about where AI can be part of your story. Um, the phrase that I've kind of latched onto when it comes to AI generating something for me, AI is fantastic at solving the tyranny of the blank page. I have something new, I have something fresh. I just need something. I just need that initial push to get started. And then from there, I can start editing, adding to, removing. And I can even have AI iterate a few times before I actually apply it to whatever, be it the code, be it a document I'm writing or a blog post or whatever. It just helps with that initial kind of push because oftentimes that's all you need to get going. Um, think about if you're going to go exercise, you start thinking through all the little steps you got to do. Oh, I got to go put on the gear. I have to get the bike down. I have to go, pump up the tires. I have to do all these other things. But if your bike was already down, the tires were already inflated, the water bottles were already filled, everything was charged up, ready to go, and all you have to do is throw on your clothes, you're like, absolutely, this is great. Throw my clothes out the door. But when you start thinking about all the little things you got to do, it's kind of very similar to when you start writing something fresh. So it comes back when we come back to AI, it really helps get you over that initial hump, and so you're ready to go. So even if you're using it to generate a deployment pipeline, I would hope that if you're just using it as like, hey, this is the basics, and I'm going to add to it, not I'm going to take whatever it generates and just blindly throw it in, because that would only end in disaster.
Yeah.
100%. I think like we've got to the point now with all of the research. There've been multiple sources now where AI kind of lands in that plus or minus 20% zone. That's where we are with it. And if you're kind of using the wrong practices, you're going to be more like that minus 20%. And if you're using the right practices, things that we've been doing for ages, the kind of the same continuous delivery, extreme programming, those enabling technical skills, and the social skills around it, then you're more likely to get that plus 20%. But I don't think we've ever had a situation where we've had this much conversation around a technology that's given us a 20% boost.
Yeah,
I kind of remember my first text editor with color coding, and that gave me a huge boost. And then we got autocomplete, and it gave me a huge boost. Probably, I don't know, 10, 20% seems like a reasonable amount. But we didn't have anyone saying we're going autocomplete first. We're going to be an autocomplete first company. Like no one said that. It's just like it's a
yeah,
tool, and we're going to use it,
yeah.
and we'll use it to make things easier. And like there are multiple benefits. It's not just speed. It's also, reducing the amount you need to store in your head. There's a whole bunch of good things about it, but like, yeah, we didn't kind of push this hard on it.
I think the thing that I'm always concerned about when we talk about AI is the loss of critical thinking. And kind of again, uh, Tony or Steve, if you look at something that's produced by marketing and you say, "Oh, this is generated by AI," you intuitively know if something's wrong just based on your years of experience and being in the trenches when anything like that doesn't seem right. That's or uh, we had a we had a situation where I think someone was trying to use AI to answer questions for a customer, and you're like about Octopus, and I'm like those answers, those words in that sentence, they make sense, but combined, it does not make sense. the way that been put together, that doesn't make sense at all. But that's because intuitively I know that that's incorrect based on over almost 10 years of experience using Octopus deployed today. And that's the concern that I have is this loss of critical thinking, especially for the college graduates that are coming out that are highly reliant on AI to do all of this stuff, or the people that are going into college today. What really worried me was when I had a conversation with my niece and nephew. My nephew, he is a sophomore in college, so he's in his second year in college or university. My niece, she's about to go into college, so she's a senior right now. She's in her, uh, and they were telling us like, "Oh yeah, I had AI write the paper for me, and I just submitted it." I'm like, "You did what now? Do you have any idea what the paper even said? Do you have any idea of the arguments that it made? Would you be willing to stand behind anything that it said? Um, did you even understand the words that it produced? Like that was just such a shortcut. And so when you use it improperly, and it's like, oh yeah, I just threw it in there and it prompted and it generated a 2,000 word document for me and happy days. I don't have to write anything. And you lose that experience. You lose that critical thinking. I think that's so critical. And this isn't just about AI. It's always going to come back to things like, give you an example, memory management. With .NET, memory management is no longer a really big deal because it has garbage collecting. It's not a big deal until it's a big deal. When you have a memory leak or your application suddenly starts consuming a gig of memory when previously it consumed 100 megabytes of memory, and you're going, what on earth is going on here? And so then you have to become an expert in how .NET handles memory. But if you go in and you start learning the basics and you understand the difference between the heap and the stack and where things get cleaned up and how garbage collection works, then you're going to be much better off as opposed to suddenly having to learn all this stuff. Same thing around Git and GUIs. All of the graphical user interfaces around Git has made it super simple to use everything, but ultimately they're just wrappers around the command line as to what Git does. And so I still think you should learn the basics and still learn how everything works. One of our colleagues, Matt, he uses the calculator analogy, just to wrap this up, he uses the calculator analogy. And so as kids, we're taught multiplication. And maybe we're taught the multiplication tables. Maybe you're not taught the multiplication tables, depends on where you went to school and what part of the country. But intuitively, if I told you that 8 times 4 is 900, you would know that that's not right because you would go, I've learned how math works. So if you enter into the calculator 8 times 4 and it spits back 900, like that's not right because you've learned the basics, you've learned the understanding. Now, you may not know exactly what 8 times 4 is off the top of your head, and that's perfectly fine, but you intuitively know that math ain't mathin'. And so you can say, okay, I need to research this. Why is it reporting this? Why is it telling me this?
Yeah, I mean, your teacher at some point should be taking you through that lesson where they say, I'm going to show you how to use a calculator. What you do is you look at the number and you just, in your head, estimate where you think it's going to land, right?
Yeah.
So if it's like 50 times 50, in your head, you just work out what kind of a number you expect, right? And you might, in your head, think, well, there's going to be a two and a five at the beginning, and then I'm going to expect to see some zeros. So if you get a number which doesn't have those things that you're anticipating, that means you've pressed a button wrong,
Yeah.
right? So it like catches that silly error where you didn't actually press times, you pressed something else on your scientific calculator, so you got a weird answer. And that's a super important part of the process. I think, in a way, I think experts have accidentally um, said that AI might be better than it is because we are so natural at fixing a block of code that's wrong. Like we do it intuitively. So I realized this because I said to someone, well, I asked it for some Python code and it seemed to be pretty good. But then I actually looked at my workflow and I looked at my commit. So what happened is it gave me some Python code, and then I instinctively started refactoring it and pulling functions out of it so I could reuse bits of it. And I was fixing errors as I went based on what it give. I could just see it was wrong, so I just changed it. And at the end, it was working code. But if I gave that to a beginner at Python, they would take that code and it just wouldn't run, and or it wouldn't give them the answer they expect, and they would be no better off than before they generated it. So it's, I think we accidentally smooth over when we are doing that instinctive fixing. And I can imagine this happening in old factories. They like bring a machine in and they're like, great, we've automated this process now. The machine is now doing this work. But what you don't realize is that Fred, who's been working there for 30 years, every time he takes something off the machine, he fixes a little problem that the machine has introduced before he passes it down to the next stage. And so when someone other than Fred does it, people downstream are like, this part is wrong. What's happened?
Yeah. Yeah. I think when it comes back to AI, it's a very powerful tool, but at the end of the day, it is still a tool. It's a circular saw. It can cut wood faster than I can do with a handsaw far and away. But at the end of the day, like you still have to be safe with a circular saw. You can't be waving it around in the air with it, with it running because naturally it's going to cause all kinds of problems. You can't use it in the rain. Um, you might have an interesting experience with that. You might have and anything along those lines. So when it comes back to, if we bring it back to platform engineering, we bring it back to DevOps, it can be used as a tool to help accelerate it, but at the same time, you need to have the experience, you need to have the knowledge, you need to have the suspicion that it's not going to be right. If you go into it going, I think what it's going to produce is 90% there, 80% correct, but I still need to check the other 20% or however long. I think you're okay with doing something like that. The other point that I'd want to make is that it's still critically important that you learn how things work and use AI to speed up the non uh, thinking parts of your day, lack of a better term, the repetitive, the all that extra stuff that you always have to do. How can it, but basically thinking through how can it help you improve your workflow, not replace completely big aspects of your workflow. And I think that's a key differentiation between the two. So when it comes back to again CI/CD, it can be used to help you write, say, a script. I've used it plenty of times to write scripts, to help get started to write a script. Like I asked it, hey, could you write a script that would query GitHub's API to look for open vulnerabilities found by dependent bot? Great. It gave me something. Yeah, there were some quirks with it, and I had to go through it, but got me started. It's like, hey, this is great. So then I was able to take that and I was able to apply that. At the end of the day, probably, I don't know if I said it made me 5 times more productive. It just, cut out a certain boring aspect of my day of having to do all that research. Um, but at the same time, I'm not going to use it to, hey, I generate a complete CI/CD pipeline, or I'm going to have AI make the determination as to what steps to run, or even using Octopus phrasing, what channels to run. No, I want that to be deterministic. I want it to be consistent every single time. I don't want it to be, will it run? Will the step run? Maybe. And then I rerun it. Well, it's going to run. Is it going to rerun that step? I don't know. You want it to make sure it's deterministic. Also, it has to be deterministic if you have to have any sort of compliance, like SOX compliance, Dodd-Frank, PCI, or any of the other fun ones that are out there, HIPAA, uh, because you have to attest to those things, and auditors will ask. Um, so if you can't prove it, then you're kind of in a bad place.
All right. Very good. Steve, have you a wrap-up question for the day or
So, okay, let's think of a quick wrap-up question to try and make it uh, controversial and musical. We normally do something musical.
Ah,
Um, how long is too long for a song? Um, and this is a slight stab at prog rock because pretty much everything they did in prog rock is too long, in my opinion. So, how long is too long for a song?
so for me, I would say the song length is less important and more about the section that you're in. So I'm going to go back to the Ninth Symphony by Beethoven in the fourth movement. That sucker's 20, 21, 22 minutes long. Um, would you say that's too long? I mean, if it was a traditional pop love song, yeah,
yeah.
I would say that that is too long because it comes back to what are you doing with each section? Are you making a meal out of each section? So coming back to prog rock, it just sounded the same over and over again. Um, it just was basically the same thing. It just felt like it was the same thing, just like for 20 minutes straight. That nothing was changing whatsoever. But when you come back to Beethoven's Ninth, like it was changing throughout that. It was he rarely repeated what was happening. And so I think that's critical. I think that's much more important. So if I was to tie it back to CI/CD, now the duration of your pipeline is, as long as it takes. Ideally, it's less than 20 minutes. Um, but if there are certain steps that you absolutely have to run, and it takes the amount of time it takes to get that step done, and there's nothing you can do to improve it, that's how long it should take. But if there's nothing else that you can do, so I hope that was a long, winding answer, but
Well, I want to build on that metaphor actually. So
yeah.
yeah, I like that comparison. I find when you look at classical music, what they're quite clever at doing, these composers with their amazing hair, is they will repeat potentially like the melody, but
Mm-hmm.
then the bass does something different underneath it, and you get
Mm-hmm.
something interesting going on. And I've noticed recently a few bands doing this. So you listen to a song that's got maybe three verses, but each verse is being done in a completely different treatment, right? Which is very
Mm-hmm.
cool. What what I would do to bring that back to CD is say that this is a little bit like if your pipeline is taking a long time, you look to do some things in parallel, right? So
Yeah.
whilst the melody is going on, maybe you can do something else at the same time that transforms it. And this goes back to what you were doing a couple of weeks back, Bob, which was you now have to do these attestations, but you don't have to wait for some other stuff. You can do them at the same time, which
Yes.
means your overall pipeline length doesn't get any longer. And I think in a song where you transform the ideas in that way, it doesn't need to be as long because you've explored lots of ideas instead of doing the same idea multiple times. And now you want to do something different, right? Because this is my big criticism, I suppose. A good example of this would be Sweet Child of Mine by Guns N' Roses.
Mm.
Obviously has one of the most iconic guitar kind of motifs that's ever
Yep.
been written. But about halfway through the song, once they've kind of overplayed it, they then go off and do something entirely different, right? It's very disconnected from the first part of the song. Well,
Yep.
if they'd done some of these things in parallel, then that actually would have been a better song, and it probably would have been a bit shorter as well. So, yeah.
Yeah. So a really good, I think in my mind, a really good example of a song that kind of changes midway through and it's not a whole meal. It's not a 10-minute song. It still is a good 3 to 5 minute song. Is Red Hot Chili Peppers. In 2022, they released their album. Um, it was Unlimited Love, and the song was White Braids in Pillow Chair. And about halfway through, it suddenly changes. And so take a listen, but it's like that was my jam for a little while. Like the summer of 2022, like that was my jam. Like I was walking around singing that song because I was just. But again, to your point, it wasn't like super long, and it wasn't. But it still changed a number of those different things. But yeah,
Mhm.
there are definitely songs that are too long, but there are also songs that are just right. A long song I think of that's too long. I wouldn't say that's too long. That's a terrible thing to say. A long song of this, an example that is long that I still think is great is Freebird because once it gets to the instrumental part, like it's building and it's building and it's building and then it comes down and then it builds and builds. So like it really is like yes, it's making a meal out of it, but it doesn't feel like it's like oh my gosh, when is this going to end? It's like okay, this is really like this is a song.
Yeah, it has to be delivering something to the
Yes.
listener. I think that's important. I think by the way, I wasn't saying that Guns N' Roses are prog rock. I just want to kind of clarify that. But,
I'm sure that have some thoughts about that.
add your comments. Are
Yeah.
Guns N' Roses prog rock? Um, but I feel that a lot of prog rock was really more about the musicians indulging themselves
Yes.
rather than them giving something to the listener. That's my
Yes.
opinion on it. And I think punk saved us from that by deliberately eschewing that virtuosity and
Hmm.
doing something that was much more simple and accessible, and you could play it at home. It was much more
Mm.
inviting. So, yeah.
Mhm. I'm gonna say most modern music probably doesn't have any business being over 4 or 5 minutes long because you've had enough by that point. If you are looking at a classic, it can be, to Bob's point, as long as it needs to be. There's probably a dynamic answer here is when you have that thought in a song, oh, is that same song still on? That's when it's been too long. At
Yeah.
that point, your brain knows, even if you're subconsciously doing something else, it's like, oh, I thought that was over. No. That's like, yeah,
And we can
should
get
have
into the
ended.
whole concept of about how modern music today is all a sea of sameness. So I think that's
Mm.
probably back to your point of why no song deserves to be over 5 minutes long when it's all
Yeah.
and every song pretty much sounds the same.
Yeah. Yeah. You've heard it all after 3 minutes.